Today I'm going to be talking about the good times and the bad times. I remember when I first got saved that all the people would say, "Oh, I remember the good times. Oh, yeah, I remember the good years." And once in a while you still hear them. Back then I kept wondering, what are they talking about? Well, now that I'm an older woman, I know what it is to remember the good times. But there's also been bad times. And those, a lot of times if we remember those, bring a lot of pain back to us. So anyway, as I was studying, I came across some good times and bad times in some people's lives in the Bible. And the first one you find in Genesis 29, and it's where Jacob was going to his uncle's house, his mom's brothers, and he was at a well, and Rachel came up because she took care of her dad's sheep, and she was a shepherdess, and she came to water, and so he turned around and helped, and she was his uncle's daughter. And so I don't know if it was a costume or what, but he gave her a kiss. It must have been on the cheek because, they had just met. They were cousins. And I got to thinking, a kiss. I remember when I first dated and when I first got my first kiss. And my mom said, "Did you feel butterflies in your stomach?" And I go, "What? Did you feel butterflies when you got a kiss?" I said, "No." I don't know if that was something that went around in our area or whether any of you ever heard that saying and felt butterflies in your stomach. And so I was laughing to myself as I was reading about Jacob giving her a kiss. So then he met his uncle and he told him that he wanted to marry Rachel. And the uncle said, "Okay, but you got to work 7 years for her." Oh, that was a good time. He worked and he knew at the end of 7 years that he was going to be Rachel's husband. So that 7 years were up, and what did the uncle do? He had an older daughter, Leah, and he didn't think that it was right for his younger daughter to marry before the older, so he gave him Leah and said he had to work another 7 years for Rachel. Can you imagine? All those years worked, excited, and now he had to work again, and he wasn't too happy with the situation because he was expecting to marry Rachel. So then the 7 years were over and he got Rachel. That was a good time. He was happy and excited. He got what he wanted. And then I read in 1 Samuel, we read about Hannah, who had for 7 years had cried and wanted a child, and she couldn't have a child. And it says in the Bible that she was really bitter in soul and wept in anguish. I know what Hannah went through. I went through that. I went through wanting to have a child and nothing. So I tried to help God. I went to doctors and went on fertility pills and nothing the first time. Second time I went on fertility pills, and we had a small church. And finally a lady in the church came up to me. She goes, "Yolanda, stop going in for fertility pills because you've already had 9 tries and there's been 9 pregnancies here in the church." Well, that was a really hard time for me. And every time they dedicated a baby, I felt like I was being torn. But then finally, I just said, "No way," I quit. But God had his own plans. At 42, I ended up in ER, finding out that I was going to be pregnant for 9 months. That was a good time. We then read about Hannah, how she prayed and prayed. But you know what? She kept her focus, knowing that she was praying to God. And God was her hope. And in verse 20 of 1 Samuel chapter 1, it said she had her son. She named him Joseph. Then in John chapter 11, verse 1 through 37, Mary and Martha had lost their brother. They were so sad. That was a really bad time. To lose a loved one, it hurts. And they were grieving. And then finally, when Jesus heard about it, he came to them and they said, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. And in John 11:35, it says that Jesus wept. He was close to him. He was their friend and he wept. And all of the grieving because he was gone. But then Jesus turned around and said, roll the stone away. And he called him out and Lazarus came out. Oh, the joy to see their brother alive again. And can you imagine the sorrow they went through? So many times we go through sorrow when we lose a loved one. But then something happens that brings the joy. The memories of that loved one that we've lost, they live in us. And so just remembering those moments brings joy. And then we read about Jesus, how Jesus was put to death. And the disciples were so discouraged. They were so scared. Here they'd lost their follower. He was dead. He promised he'd come back. And that was a very bad time. Some of them ran. They were scared because they were afraid they would be killed because they had hung around with Jesus. And here, a few days later, he arose. Oh, the joy, all the good times of knowing that he had come back to life, that he had said he would come back to life. You know, a lot of times when we go through bad times, what is it that we focus on? It's hard when your heart's broken, when you've lost someone. It's hard if you've lost a job, if you've been betrayed. It's really hard and it hurts. And a lot of times it's like you're in a dark tunnel and there's no light and you feel like you're all alone. There's nobody there. But what do you focus on? I know that the one thing when I went through the darkest part of my life, I just said, I don't care. I know I prayed to you. I don't feel you, Jesus, but I know that I gave my life to you. And just stopping and praising Jesus, singing a chorus or repeating a verse to yourself, thinking about the goodness of God, that even though we're having a really bad time, he'll carry us through the hard times. He's by our side. He never leaves us or forsakes us. Jesus loves you. Jesus is always with you. Even though at times it don't feel like it, even though at times the devil says, well, he doesn't care. Yes, he cares. And he loves you. No matter what you're going through, God is there with you. May God bless you. And may you in your good times and bad times look up to Jesus.